Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lainie Strange. I work in Office of Administration, ITSD, and we're going to be covering what's new in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.2. So I thought I'd just show my face for a second so you know face with name, and then we're going to pop into the presentation today. All right. Can you see my presentation okay? Awesome. Great. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move over to my next slide. Okay, so this is what we're going to be covering today. And we're going to cover a brief history of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, especially as well as mentioning how the state came to adopt them. And then we're going to be focusing specifically on the ones that were updated and added in version 2.2. And those will be focus not obscured, dragging movements, target size minimum, consistent help, redundant entry, and accessible authentication minimum. And I'm going to go ahead and jump in. And if you want to, just as far as just housekeeping, you can, whatever you're comfortable with. Yeah, will the presentation be shared after the meeting? Yes, it will be. And you can go ahead and pop questions in as we go along, and we'll kind of play it by ear. We may push the questions to the end, um, but we'll give the option to either pop questions in the chat, or at the very end, you could unmute and ask questions, whichever way is your convenience on that, what your preference. So we definitely want to need dialogue on as we're going along with this. All right. So just a brief history of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which I will refer to as WCAG from here on out. And this is the timeline. So the first version came out in 1999. So very early days of the web. The state, was just in its infancy of having websites. And the focus was HTML accessibility. And then I've got information here about kind of what year the state adopted a particular standard. And so the state adopted it in 2003 when we created what we called an accessibility standard document. And then 2.0 came out in 08. And some of the main focus that came out of that is something called the POUR principles. We won't get into that today, but we're going to be having a web accessibility awareness training that we're going to have available that will cover POUR for both state employees, as well as we'll have a version of that we'll just put out in our public space as well. Version 2.1 came out in 2018, and then we adopted it in 2024. Version 2.2 came out in 2023, and we adopted it in 2025. I know that that timeline seems kind of quick there at the end. The 2.2 update had it was probably the one of the it was the smallest update. So, for example, 2.1 had 12 A and AA guidelines added, whereas 2.2 had 6. So, it was a little bit smaller of an update. So, and we're trying to just get in alignment and kind of stay ahead of the curve as we're moving in and getting in compliance with WCAG 2.1. And then the fact that everybody's kind of looking at sites and updating, we just figured it would be a really good time to go ahead and just update the state to 2.2 so that from here on out, we'll be following this guideline for a while. And so just a few other notes. We have had a state accessibility law since 1999. And then the state of Missouri began adopting the WCAG guidelines through that standard document that I mentioned. And that was created in 2003, this corresponding standard document, which we will have resources at the end to various things that I mentioned. I wanted to make a quick mention. There might be some people going, hey, is there going to be another version after this? How far out are we looking at potentially having to do yet another update later on? There is a WCAG 3.0, which was actually rebranded and renamed the W3C Accessibility Guidelines. And that first draft was 2016. It's currently in a working draft, and the latest update from that committee was that the publication schedule will be announced in early 2026. And that just means the schedule. That doesn't mean it will be published in early 2026. And the way that you conform the model of it changes. And then one thing that I wanted to mention here, the state's current standard outlines that any new WCAG guideline will be adopted 2 years after the publication date. So 3.0 hasn't even been published yet. So, that moving to a new standard will be, out into the foreseeable future. So that will be nothing that happens very soon. So we'll be setting in this version for a while. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into one of the first of the six. I wanted to also make mention that the WCAG guidelines have an additional level called AAA, and the state does not require AAA, and the federal ADA Title II also does not require AAA. So it's purely optional to look at those particular guidelines, so they will not be part of the scope of what we talk about today. And one other thing, on one of my previous screens, 2.1 and 2.2 focus a lot on cognitive disability, low vision, how that relate, especially 2.2, how it relates to mobility, and it kind of addresses some of the other things that the earlier versions, some of those disability areas where they were just kind of missing the mark on, and trying to get everything up, up more even across the different disability categories. So, focus not obscured. So the definition, when an element receives focus, it must be at least partially visible. And the role of the people that would be implementing something like this would be designers, developers. Now, obviously, we have a wide variety of people listening today, and anybody that has a hand in content creation or helping, create or set up a site, having these skills to kind of understand these accessibility laws is still something good, because then you kind of know what to look for. You may not know how to implement it, but you know what is the right, level of accessibility when you have that knowledge. So, kind of in plain language, what is it? It's any item receiving keyboard focus should always be at least partially visible on the user's browser window. This guarantees that focus elements are not completely hidden by other content. So you may see things like, and you're seeing it more prominently, like what we call sticky headers or sticky footers, or you see modal windows a lot. And and while it's best to keep the elements fully visible, it's not required at the AA level to be those elements to be completely visible. So in the example that you're seeing, I have a little screenshot here where you're seeing a contact us button that is partially obscured, that actually technically passes. Now I have a red X by it saying, oh, don't do this. But the point of it is, making sure that, we do see part of that button, but you want to make sure, hey, is there anything else above that contact us that's out of view? And we want it from a design perspective that we're making sure that as you scroll down, you're seeing all the information there, or when you're keyboard focusing, you don't want things to go out out of view to the point, in some cases you're not even seeing it at all. So, and those affected are keyboard users, low vision, and cognitive disabilities. Again, this is some of the main ones that these are some of the key areas that you'll see over and over in these guidelines. Why does it matter? When focus elements are hidden or blocked, users relying on keyboards can't tell whether their interaction is happening. So they may be keyboarding and then they're like, I don't even understand what I'm focusing on because it's focusing on something that's hidden. So, making sure that that padding with your design is in place so that someone using a keyboard that sees that visual focus will see the elements and they're not hidden away somewhere. And so what we will get into just like kind of testing. And so you may see here and there, you may see um, uh, code snippets, different things like that. So we're kind of covering the bases on how you would be implementing this. So, just making sure all focus elements should remain at least partially visible. And we're talking modals, banners, dialogues, things like that, that you don't want anything fully blocked from focus. Design modal dialogues to take focus when they appear and prevent interactions with underlying content, making sure that, yeah, I do a lot of testing, and on occasion I'll be testing a modal and doing my keyboard testing, and it'll actually be focusing on the window behind it. And so it's just a programmatic thing to make sure. Checking content to make sure that you can go up to 200% and still still get the information and things aren't completely obscured. And then I have some examples here from a, CSS perspective, how one in the example that I have here, how you would implement that. And there's a scroll padding top in this example where I would um, you know, implement it where it just nicely pushes the content down so it's always stays in view. And then scroll padding bottom as well for if you had a sticky footer, which I see those sometimes too. And then there's an additional piece of CSS where as you're scrolling and you're using the scroll padding top and bottom, that it transitions smoothly. So those are kind of the key pieces of information that you need. Okay, dragging movement, the number 2, this is the next one. Actions that require dragging, like reordering, must also be possible using buttons or another method that does not require dragging. And this is affecting designers and developers again. And what is it? If a task on your website requires dragging, and I'll be providing some examples of what we're talking about, there must be an easier alternative provided. Instead of dragging, you should be able to complete the same action with a tap, a click, or other simple input. Dragging motions are typically found in things like a slider bar, like a volume, or some other slider being used for some other reason. Color pickers, sortable lists, um, um, you know, different boards where you can drag and drop tasks, in different columns, and interactive maps like a Google map. And then I have just a little bit more information for this is referencing a couple of other WCAG guidelines to just show you the distinction between 2.5.7 and a couple of the other guidelines that are in that aren't being covered in the session today, that has to do with 2.5.1 pointer gestures and 2.1.1 keyboard, so I've got a little additional information there about that. Why does it matter? Without a single pointer option for dragging, some users might not be able to use certain parts of a website. People with mobility issues might find dragging difficult or tiring, like when panning across a map or dragging items in a website builder. People who use assistive tools like trackballs or eye gaze system, there's systems in place where people can move things around and activate on the screen actually with the movement of their eyes, or in some cases their head, for example. And simple features like sliders or volume controls can be completely inaccessible in cases like this if you don't have alternatives. So again, those affected, mobility or fine motor control, and people that are using other types of input devices like what we were talking about there. So how to implement? So any component, element, or interface that needs dragging, you have to make sure there's an easy single point option as an alternative. Single pointer options can include clicking a button or typing in a value. So for a volume slider, an example would be users type a number value into an input or click a plus or minus button to adjust volume. For sortable lists, allow users to reorder items with, an up down arrow, or if you need to move things back and forth from different columns, kind of a left to right type of thing. For interactive maps, allow users to pan using directional buttons. So in this, I have an example screenshot where it's showing someone who's, you know, moving around by, just using a, pointer gesture. But you can also have a directional, um, set of buttons, an up, down, left, and right, and those are keyboard accessible. And then you activate it. You can activate it by using your arrow keys or different things like that. So it completely makes an alternative version for it. And I see these implemented. Next time you're on a map, you'll notice if you look around, you'll see those kind of options that are available as an alternative. Okay, the next one, target size minimum, 2.5.8. Targets must be at least 24 by 24 pixels unless they are part of a sentence or block of text surrounded by enough space or near another target with the same function that meets the size. The role of people who would implement, developers and designers. So what, in plain language, what is it? Buttons, links, and other interactive elements should be at least 24 by 24 pixels. But if that's not possible, they should have enough empty space around them to make clicking easier, meaning, if you have a smaller image and you add space around it, that equates to 24 by 24 or higher. Even if an element is smaller, again, you can add space around it, but it's always a good idea to make them bigger for easier use. So, that the recommendation would be to make that element bigger, but the other option is available. Why does it matter? Tiny buttons and links are frustrating to click or tap, especially on touch screens like phones and tablets. We've all been there. I know I have. I've been on a phone trying to click something, and because it was adjacent to something else, I clicked the wrong thing and it took me to the wrong place, or it jumped me out of something I was doing. So when they're placed too close together, you can tap the wrong thing by mistake. People with limited hand control, like those with tremors, arthritis, or other mobility challenges, I mean, it just increases. And they really struggle to tap small buttons. So if elements are too close together, they could tap or click the wrong one, just like what we mentioned, or not even be able to tap it at all. So it affects mobility impairments, people on smaller screens, people in unstable environments, where you can't hold something still, and people with large hands and fingers. So how to implement it? So make all buttons and links and interactive elements 24 by 24 pixels. So, this comes into play with styling and icon design and different things like that. Um, you'll be adjusting CSS settings, using the min height and min widths properties, and adding padding to help get that up to that total size of 24 by 24. So in the image over here to the right, we have some examples. Example one, the buttons are 24 by 24 pixels and they meet that rule. Number two, the buttons are smaller, but they've been accommodated with space around them and they still pass. The third example are buttons that are too small. Each button is 12 pixels with no additional space around them. That's an example of something that would not meet. So then we'll get into some exceptions or, other ways to, um, successfully apply this rule. Equivalent action element. An exception to this rule, if there's another element with the equivalent action on the page. So in the example here, I have a small interactive element that actually, it's a 12 pixel call button, but then to the right, I have a larger button that actually just says call now, and it fits because it's 24 high by 72 wide. So, just creating an equivalent on the same page will work. Um, Exceptions for inline elements. So interactive elements in line with text, such as sentences, paragraphs, are an exception, since the line height limits the size and it's impossible to tell where the interactive element will fall. And this is especially true as screen sizes change from desktop to tablet to mobile. You don't know how those links are going to wrap, and is a link going to go from one line to two lines, etc. So they've actually created links like this, links within a sentence or a paragraph. They have set those as an exception. Now, they do recommend, just as best practice, to, in cases like this, to seriously think about just increasing the line height, but it's not required for compliance for this. Here's another exception for target size. It's absolutely necessary, if it's absolutely necessary or legally required for the target size and spacing to be smaller than the 24 by 24 pixels, this rule can be skipped. So I'll provide an example of what we're talking about. Below is an example of a map, and we have a lot of these across state government too, where we've got a map that has location pins all over it, and the pins um, the pins are too close together and not big enough, but it's necessary since we can't control where those pins will be placed. Because of that reason, it becomes an exception to the rule because of the fact that, there's no defined places that these pins are going to be. And if they are too large, they can become indistinguishable from each other. So another exception. Okay, moving on. 3.2.6, consistent help. Help options like a contact link or a contact section or a support widget must appear in the same place across pages. So the roles affected are designers, developers, and then obviously people who can edit, create content, etc. So what exactly in layman's terms does this mean? So if a website offers options or info to help users with questions or issues, their placement on relevant pages should be consistent and stay in the same general order compared to the other elements on the page. So, for example, contact forms or chat systems to reach human support teams, chatbots to reach automated systems, contact info such as phone numbers, email addresses, hours of operation. A lot of times on our sites, we may have these contact sections, consistently placed in certain parts of the page, or in many cases, we have like global information in the footer. That's just some examples of what we're talking about. Self-help options such as documentation pages or, you know, frequently asked questions sections that, comprise a section of the site or a, or the whole or the site, you know, the entire site, for example. And I'll get into some more explanations here. So when help options or details are scattered across different pages, it can be tough for users to find that help that they need. Moving around contact links, chatbot pop-ups, or FAQ sections across similar pages can confuse users as they browse a site. So we have a couple of examples here where the one on the right, we have a contact us button, and it's just giving an example of where you had a set of, you know, grouped pages, and in two different layouts of the page, the contact us button got moved to a different spot. So it doesn't help with that, kind of getting to know that layout to intuitively know where to look, or, you know, no matter what kind of tool you're using to access the site. So then over to the left, it's just showing an example where we have a contact box, and from page to page, it was located in the same place. In this example, in the footer portion off to the right. Who is affected? Cognitive disabilities, lower limited vision, and people who are blind. Because if you can sense where certain things are on the page, your eye can immediately kind of go to those spots. Or in the cases of people navigating, low vision or screen readers, then they can kind of intuitively know how many clicks it's going to be to get them to their spot. But if it moves around, how are they going to find it? So first, go through the pages on your site and figure out which groups of pages make up related sets. So, just as an example, agencies divide up their sites by a set of programs, or they may be grouped in divisions, for example, and they're kind of a set of pages. Or a blog where each post uses a similar template would be considered a unique set of pages. So find all the helpful options or information that fall under these categories, if any, like contact information, a link to a contact form, um, you know, where does a chat bot pop up on the screen? Is it consistently popping up in the same location on the page? um, Self-help options such as FAQ sections or links to a documentation page, like I mentioned, like chatbots having them in a particular place. Now, in a lot of cases with agency sites, contact information may be in that. It may not even be a set of pages. It may be, you know, we try to create consistent templates as much as we can. So contact information may fall in the lower right below a right nav bar or something like that. And it may just change based on the program that you're in. So a lot of these kind of things, we're already following these things. If you have a web application with a help page, make sure it's always in the same spot. If it's up in the upper navigation, different things like that, just kind of confirming that you're doing things consistently so that those things are easily findable. Right. 3.3.7 redundant entry. So this one has to do with don't ask for the same information twice in the same process. Provide pre-filled fields or selection options if the information was already given. So again, this is much more specific to, form building or web application systems, different things like that. And designers and developers are the ones that would be implementing this. A web form should not ask users to enter the same information more than once in a single session. This is especially important for multi-step forms and processes. For example, when completing a checkout form, users should not have to separately enter their billing and shipping information if they are the same. So there's a really common one that you see on commerce sites where you put in your billing information and then you got a nice little checkbox. Is billing the same as shipping? You check it and then it auto populates for you. Why does it matter? Obviously, requiring users to remember and re-enter information can cause stress and mistakes. Everyone experiences mental fatigue while completing multi-step processes, and adding memory tasks makes the process even more difficult. Um, Nobody enjoys re-entering, information, obviously. People with cognitive disabilities or limited mobility are especially affected by it. So you just want to make sure that as applications are being built, and this is probably especially true if you have like a web application, like you said, that's multi-step process, and you maybe have phases to the system that are implemented later on. Obviously, you're going to have checks and balances in there where to make sure that you're not re-asking for information that you potentially asked for in a previous step as part of your application. How to implement, remove any fields that ask for the same information, obviously more than once. Make sure every form input is necessary. Okay, and then populating data from previous input. Instead of making users remember what they entered before, you can autofill previous data. So in the example that I talked about with the billing and the shipping information, that's a great example. For fields that appear more than once, make sure there's a way to populate them easily. This can be done in a number of ways by automatically filling the field and letting the user edit it, providing a checkbox to let the user choose to fill the field, or asking the user to confirm if the previous information is still correct, and if not, showing new empty input fields. So most of the time redundant inputs should be avoided, but there's obviously some exceptions. Games where repeating inputs is part of the challenge, so that may be innately part of the application, such as memory quizzes. And then, of course, a big one that's probably comes to mind for a lot of people is the confirm password field. That is an obvious exception. And you see confirm email quite a lot. That's an exception. And when previous entries, it's like something expires and it needs to be updated. Those are the exceptions there. All right, 3.3.8, accessible authentication. Authentication must not rely on memory alone. Allow copy paste, password managers, or other options like email verification. And the roles affected are, again, designer, developers, anybody that's managing the authentication process of any type of system. So authentication, or the ability to log into a website, should not feel like, a complete memory test. Having to remember passwords, you know, re- eh, you know, type in codes or solve puzzles can make logging in unnecessarily difficult. The goal is to make authentication simple for everyone, especially those who have difficulty with memory or complex tasks. So, why does this matter? Issues that can happen during inaccessible authentication setups, people forgetting their passwords, struggling with the password reset process, difficulty figuring out how to transcribe one time or time limited codes, and the infamous getting stuck on a CAPTCHA that's requiring solving a puzzle, math problem, or working with those wonderful blurry images. These issues can cause frustration and can prevent people from accessing critical services like, you know, banking, healthcare, government services, and, just using systems even in your workday. And the main target audience is cognitive disabilities that are affected by this. So how to implement it? So I kind of came up with I looked out on the web and I found kind of the best steps for kind of explaining this in a step-by-step process to make it easy to understand. So, as far as the implementation of what this is requiring, number one, you just need to identify authentication steps in your, web application. Locate all processes that require a user to authenticate, such as logging in, completing a security check like a CAPTCHA, or resetting a password. Next, you'll evaluate whether there is some sort of cognitive function test, meaning, for each step, determine if a cognitive test is required. This includes tasks like, just simply remembering a password or a code, solving a puzzle, you know, getting that code from a text message or an email, identifying non-text content provided by the user in a CAPTCHA, or recognizing images like, the infamous CAPTCHA where you have to pick all the images with a car in it. Step three, you're going to check for exceptions. There are a few exceptions. Um, and I went ahead right in my presentation and put some links to just explain this, and it has kind of mostly to do with CAPTCHA is the test having to do with object recognition or personal content identification. Actually, this means it would be met, and there's more details about what that specifically means. And then, is it a general cognitive function test? If the test requires memory, like remembering a password or remembering or grabbing a code from a text message, then an alternative or mechanism must be available. So this is and then this is where I go in and explain the alternative and the mechanisms. You have to pick one of these. So if a general cognitive test is required, ensure one of the following is available. Just a minimum of one. There can always be the possibility that you have more than one of these options, but a minimum of one. Um, Biometric authentication, meaning fingerprint, facial recognition, because using one of those doesn't require, um, something with memory. A passwordless login, like an email magic link, which I have a screenshot of over to the right. And then there could be other methods that kind of are similar to this that are either available now or could be in the future. And then we have three other options. Even just minimally allowing users to paste into password fields, copy and paste a password into the password field or a code field or whatever, it would comply with this rule. Providing support for password managers to autofill credentials within an application. That's another way that you can comply with this. And then, yeah, I mentioned the copying and paste of security codes there as well. So copying and pasting of either password fields, depending upon, if you're referring to password fields, you need to, implement that. If your authentication for, resetting passwords is security code, copy and paste would work for that. So then just kind of to wrap it up, verify input field behavior. Ensure that input fields do not prevent users from pasting the entire password or code in one action. Confirm that the structure of the fields does not make it impossible to use a password manager or copy the code. And then one other thing I had read about that I thought was interesting, and it could be kind of like I wanted to throw it out there in case it was a question that would pop up. So if the code is sent to a separate device, how does that play into it? Because you're like, they're not even on the same device. So, and we do that all the time. If the code is sent to a separate device, such as via SMS, and you're on your desktop, it's not necessary to validate whether the users can copy or transfer the code between the devices. The thing that doesn't matter. You only just have to have the ability for them to input it into on the desktop. So, for example, they just need the ability on the desktop to, for example, paste the password in. And and for someone with a disability, they may email it from their phone over to their desktop. So the way they get it there, it just means that the final input will accept a copy paste or a password manager or anything like that. All right. Okay, that covers the six. And then we'll go ahead and kind of address questions or comments. I've got my contact information on here. I went ahead and added resources on here since we covered 2.2. I wanted to, you know, get a resource to you that covers the other um, guidelines. And again, just to make it clear, like WCAG 2.2, when you go and look at the guidelines themselves, it's cumulative. So 2.2 has has all the guidelines in it. It's just a cumulative thing. 2.1 includes 2.0 and so forth. So just to kind of explain that. And then our main state of Missouri information communication technology accessibility site hosted at Missouri Assistive Technology. And then Missouri Assistive Technology has a YouTube channel where there's a lot of accessibility training there. And this training will be housed there, in the near future. And then I've added a link here on a state website and applications accessibility testing page. And that includes a testing checklist for all of the WCAG, 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2 guidelines. All right. So with that, we are at 147. I'll go ahead and take a peek at our chat to see if we've got anything. All right. Okay. Oh, I didn't realize that it was capped at 100. Sorry about that. Does anyone have a resolution? I don't know if Missouri Assistive Technology had seen that or not. How does content inside carousels, accordions, and tabs factor into not having content hidden or obscured? Okay, that is a very good question. So when it comes to carousels, accordions, or tabs, they kind of work more in an active or inactive kind of situation where the nature of how they're designed, they have they have hidden, states to them. That would be a different state. It wouldn't the obscuring would just be where I think we're in a sense talking about active content on the page. Now, you may go in through tabbing or like keyboard tabbing or clicking or whatever, and you go through and you activate an accordion or you scroll through a carousel, and that yeah, when you have a closed accordion or you have carousel items that aren't displayed, that's not considered obscured because those items are in an inactive state. Just to clarify, if we go to WCAG 2.2, it will cover everything. Yep, yep, it definitely will. So, so yeah, for example, you know, when you go to the W3C site where the guidelines are kept, and you Googled WCAG 2.2, or went to the site, or clicked into the links that I'm providing. If you go to 2.2, it includes 2.0 and 2.1. So with that, does anybody else have any questions if they want to, you know, if they want to unmute or pop them in the chat? Well, I'm going to say with that, again, I've got my information here, my email address. If you want to reach out, if you end up having a follow-up question about this. Okay, Eric Thurman. Okay, how does oh wait, okay, Eric, I answered that one. Does Eric have a does Eric have another question?
Hey, Lainie, this is Eric. No, I don't have
Wait,
another question.
okay,
Yeah, I think
okay.
you read it out and
Yep,
then
yep,
answered it. So
yep, yep. Yeah, that was a very good question. Hadn't thought about that scenario. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. And please, yeah, feel free to reach out if you end up having any questions about what we went over. Um, the the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines site itself gives you lots of examples. You can go in all these, all the 6 guidelines that I went over. It gives you practical examples of what what a success, what a pass and what a fail looks like, so you can kind of go there and kind of think of different scenarios, and it'll give you a lot of examples of, here are examples of, um, pertaining to a particular guideline. What's a passing example? What's a failing example? It's really helpful. But with that, I thank you.